Hi everybody, this is part 2 of the Italeri 132 scale Tornado build, and we've got quite a bit to do in this second part of the build series by getting the front nose section of the fuselage together. That means that we've got to finish off the last bits and pieces in the cockpit, build the nose undercarriage bay, fit the nose undercarriage leg for reasons that I'll talk about a bit later on in the video, and get the whole thing assembled. I've managed to do that. It's taken me the best part of 2 weeks since the last video was published to do all that. But as I said, it's come together pretty well. The first thing that I'm going to do in the video is just explain some of the changes that I've made in the cockpit, because it does look a little bit different to how I left it in part 1. So we'll get over to the bench and I'll show you what I've been doing over the last 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, let's get to it, and just to bring you up to speed with a couple of modifications that I've made, or changes that I've made to the cockpit since part 1. The first is that I've repainted the shoulder harness in the dark green colour. I just checked my references and I noticed that they weren't the original tan orange colour that I'd painted them in part 1. So I've just carefully gone over them with the green, given them a bit of highlighting, and applied the stitching decals that I did in part 1 again. The second thing that I've done is completely rework the pilot's instrument panel, which I wasn't happy with. The main problem was that the 132 scale Airscale instrument decals that I used were too big, and as a result I had to cut them down with a hole punch, and that lost some of the detail on them. So a friend of mine, Phil, tipped me off that the 148 scale set was a much better fit. So I got a set, and sure enough they finished the panel off a lot nicer. The other thing that I've got to do is to scratch build a selection lever here. I think it might even be the undercarriage selection lever, which is completely missing from the Italeri kit. So it's a bit obvious that that's missing, so I'll do that. The other thing that I've done is to make some hoses for the head boxes, but we'll come back to those in a second. The first thing I want to do is to make up this lever from some styrene stock. So that's the first thing we'll do, get that fitted. Okay, onto the head box hoses now, which are these 4 pieces that I've scratch built. And I've used some nickel silver rod to form the shape of these. Nickel silver's pretty stiff, and once you've shaped it, it doesn't easily bend it back out of shape. So you can get the shape that you want and then wind it with some soft copper wire to give the hose effect. And then I've just painted these and weathered and highlighted them just to get the detail to stand out a little bit. And now I'll fit the rear ones. The hoses to the pilot's seat can't go in until I've got the cockpit fitted into the fuselage, because they go along and into the fuselage sides. Okay, so I think that's as much as I can do on the cockpit for now. So what I'm going to do now is get the nose fuselage halves ready to accept the cockpit and also the nose undercarriage bay. So we're going to need to do a little bit of work with those parts, so we'll get them out and see what they look like. Okay, so these are the nose fuselage halves, as you can see. And what I'm aiming to do for the rest of this video is to get these prepared, the cockpit fitted, but I'm also going to have to fit the nose undercarriage bay as well. Now, if you've seen one of my previews from a week or so ago, you'll know that I'm using the 3D Chute Expert undercarriage set. And these are really fantastic. I've done the review. If you want to go and have a look at them in detail, you can take a look at that video. But because of the way the top of the leg attaches into the sides of the undercarriage bay bulkheads, I'm going to have to fit the leg and then find a way of protecting it for the rest of the build. It's not ideal, and there may be a way of adapting this a little bit so that you could fit it later, but I can't think of one offhand. But before we get to the nose undercarriage, just a word about the panel lines in the Italeri kit. It's one of the big criticisms of this kit that the panel lines are extremely overscale, as you can see here. They're both too deep and too wide. So what I'm going to be doing on the whole of the airframe is to use some Mr. Surfacer 500, that's the thick grade of Mr. Surfacer, to just fill in the panel lines a little bit, let it dry and then wipe across, just to lessen the effect of these. It certainly takes some depth out. It doesn't really do that much for the width of the lines, but I think under a coat of primer after that treatment we should be okay. It's certainly a big improvement. I'm going to leave the actual catches and hinges in their original depth. I just want to differentiate between what's a panel line and what is an access hatch. So hopefully that should give a little better result. The other thing that I'm doing is to add some detail onto the sills here. I've also gone ahead and filled some ejector pin marks. There are 3 on the inside of the cockpit. At least 2 of them, these 2 rear ones, probably visible on the finished model. So that's just a bit of filler rub down. And the detailing here on the side rails is just some plastic sheet, and I'll add some knobs and other bits of detail onto those as well. So I'm going to start with finishing this detailing off on the rails, and then we can move on to look at the undercarriage bay. Okay, so an hour or so with some styrene sheet and rod, and I've just busied the sidewalls up a little bit on the cockpit. Some of this is pretty difficult to see. A lot of it's hidden underneath this shelf on the cockpit top. So you just got to balance whether or not it's worth doing too much on that. But I'm happy enough with that for the moment, so I'm going to give it a coat of primer and then a coat of dark grey. Okay, with the cockpit done, it's time to sort out this undercarriage bay, this nose gear bay. And the first thing to do is to release the 3D print nose leg from the printing block. These are really very fine, so they take no effort to clean up. Actually, they'll just snap off with the finger. Just give them a little bit of a tidy up. I'll just check the wheels for fit. They're snug, but they're okay. Okay, I think that's good to go. Beautiful detail on that. So I'll just disassemble the Italeri parts. Just check the fit of the pins into the side bulkhead. I don't want them over tight. That's all good. Just adding a little bit of detailing on this bay. The leg itself takes up quite a bit of space in here. So in some cases, when you're adding cables and wires and removing plastic detailing, as I am here, it's easier in the long run, quicker in the long run, to just remove everything and just reinstate it, rather than try to carve around the bits and pieces that you wanted to keep. This is lead wire, which is very easy to bend. It's very soft, obviously. You just need to be a little bit careful when you're using it not to mark it with the tweezers. Okay, I'm not going to add any more at this stage because it might obstruct the fit of the parts. I can always add some more later on once we get the bays together. The next job is to get some primer on these, and I'm going to be using a black primer on all the undercarriage bays. That'll enable me to add the light grey over the top. These were a very light grey, not white. Over the top so that we get some shading on the undercuts of the detail. So we'll give that a go. We'll start with the black first of all. Okay, just a gentle dry brush now with some of the base colour, which is Tamiya LP34 light grey, and that's just lightened a little bit with some lacquer flat white. And really this stage is just to catch the edges of the detail, and it just makes them pop out a little bit more. But I don't want to go so far as to make the legs look white. So it's a very controlled step. And with these legs you have to be very careful because there's so much fine detail, the cables and so on, that you don't want to snap those off. It'd be easy to do that. So that'll do for this stage. I've just got a couple of bits of detail painting to do, then we'll get a coat of gloss varnish on these. Okay, it's time to apply a wash to these parts now, and for that I'm going to be using this, which is AK's landing gear wash. It's actually a very dark grey, it's an enamel product, so it goes on okay over the top of the lacquer gloss varnish, and because we've got the gloss varnish it's going to be easy to manoeuvre and wipe off if we need to. But I'm only going to apply a very light coating to the detail. I'm not going to flood the parts with the wash. I'm applying the wash with one of Tamiya's brushes from their panel line accent colour. Got a nice sharp point on them, and they're really good for manoeuvring any sort of enamel wash really. The Tamiya products and enamel. Some quite nice detail out of the box on these parts. Okay, so I'll leave that to dry, and once it is dry we can come back and give it a clean up. Just blend things in a little bit. Can look a little bit harsh to start with, so we'll do that next up. Okay, they've cleaned up nicely, so the next job is to give these a coat of semi-gloss varnish, and for that I'll use some Tamiya lacquer semi-gloss, and then after that we'll come back and do the last of the detail painting, then we can assemble the wheel bay. Okay, with the undercarriage bay sorted out, the nose gear bay anyway, we can get the forward fuselage parts sorted out now. We've got a couple of jobs to do. The filling of the panel lines, as I mentioned earlier on in the video, and the second one is to check the fit of this lower plate. There's a known problem of the fit of this lower plate to the main fuselage assembly, so we need to just sort that one out as well. I'll start with the lower plate, and then we'll get the filling done on this whole assembly. So this is the main body of the fuselage, if you like. And what I want to do is just make sure we've got a nice tight fit of the forward plate onto the underside at this point. And you might be able to see that as it comes straight out the box, we've got a gap here which needs to be corrected. We just need to get that tight up. So it means that we've got to alter these tabs a little bit so that the lower plate fits tighter in. So let's just pull this apart. So I just want to see where the interference is taking place. Okay, so that's nice and tight now, and it was just a case of removing plastic from the forward plate in between these tabs, which was just causing that obstruction. So as you can see, nice and closed up. So that's the first job. The next thing to do is to sort out the panel lines. So we'll get some Mr. Surfacer 500 and we'll just drop it into all these panel lines and see if we can improve the appearance a little bit. So this is the thick grade of Mr. Surfacer. See, it's quite gloopy, and I'm just going to drop that into the panels. This is quite a bit of work to do this across the entire airframe, which is quite big, as you would imagine. But it's really a job that needs doing, I think. I've seen it suggested that another way of sorting these panel lines out is to completely fill them and rescribe the airframe, but that feels to me like a big job. And I'm not sure that the overall appearance at the end would be significantly better than doing it like this. And of course, the difficulty of getting a neat finish to rescribe panel lines, it's pretty difficult. So for me, this is probably the most sensible balance, really, between reducing the panels, the overstated panels, and keeping them reasonably neat. But as you can see, it's quite a task. So I'm going to carry on with that, and we'll come back once the forward part of the airframe is ready to clean up. So that's the three parts that we're concerned with at the moment, all filled in. And it's a little bit of trial and error, really. What I'll do is clean these up, apply an overall coat of primer through the airbrush, just to see what the new effect looks like. And if necessary, we might have to go back and refill some of them. But from the work I did on this starboard panel, one coat generally is enough. You've sometimes got to go over it a little bit, as I have here. But as I said, trial and error. Let's see when we're happy with it. Okay, I can get this nose gear together now. Just got one or two jobs to do with some bare metal foil. That's this stuff. And I like to use this for oleo struts. Just gives a better appearance, I think, than painting. So I'll do that with some matte aluminium. That's this one. And I'm also going to back up the light lens here with some ultra bright chrome. And once we get the clear lens on the front, that should reflect through. Okay, with the lens burnished, or the bare metal foil burnished down into the lens, we can take a look at the actual lens cover. You can polish the bare metal foil into position with an old brush. This is an old makeup brush, I think. Not mine, incidentally. So let's take a look at the lenses. So this is the lens that comes with the 3D Chute Expert set, which I'm assuming is some form of resin. And like a lot of resin transparencies, it's not particularly clear. So we can take a look at the lens that's provided in the kit, which fortunately is exactly the correct size, and it's perfectly clear. So that's the one that I'm going to use. I'll fit that later on in the build. I like to leave lenses and clear parts as late on as possible, just to avoid marring them. So we need to keep that somewhere safe. So at this stage we're going to have to position the nose leg. Now the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that I've broken off the jack, the actuator, and it just shows how delicate these parts are. All I was doing was putting the painted part down on the bench, and I must have caught it just wrong and it snapped off. But I've got a fix for that. I'll come back to that in a moment. What I want to do now is just get the leg into position, and we have to hook it underneath this bulkhead at the front. And whilst that's in position, I'm just going to add a last piece of wiring from the strut here down into the bay. So here we've got the replacement jack from nickel silver rod, and actually I think that looks better than the original part. So it's one of those fortuitous accidents, I guess. So now I can assemble the other side of the bay. Quick check to make sure everything's going to go together. And that's all good. So the next job is to clean up the airframe parts that I applied the Mr. Surfacer to earlier on. So just a bit of lacquer thinners and a cloth. I'm kind of wiping across the panel line. I don't want to pull all the Mr. Surfacer out. The other thing is not to put too much thinners on the rag, otherwise it will take too much out. It's a sort of thing you can experiment with. If you get it wrong, you can always redo it. Okay, so that's a bit of an improvement. We'll see what it looks like under a coat of sprayed primer. And as I said, you can always rework this until you're happy with the appearance. Okay, so just a check coat of primer, and I think that's probably enough. Bearing in mind that we've got top coats, varnish coats to go on top of that. So I think that's probably going to improve the situation quite a bit. So I think at that stage I can start to get the nose assembled. We'll start off by fitting the nose gear bay into this bottom plate. Okay, let's get the undercarriage bay fitted now, and I want to use some epoxy on this. I want to make sure it's not going to go anywhere. I'm expecting this to be quite a heavy model when it's finished, and there is a 60 gram nose weight just about above this, so obviously I don't want this pushing up into the fuselage once everything's together. The undercarriage bay is nice and solid now. I've actually left it overnight, so the epoxy that I used has gone completely hard. That's not going to move anywhere now. At this stage it's going to be easier to fit these blanks. These are for the gun muzzles. We've got this side closed and the starboard side has the muzzle exposed, and I've got some 3D printed replacements for the Italeri muzzles, which are a lot nicer. These parts are much easier to trim and get a nice fit on before we actually join the fuselage halves up. And it is possible to get a nigh on perfect fit, but not out of the box, because the problem with them is that the the insert is too thick. So it stands proud unless you do some trimming of it. What I found is if you just put a chamfer on the back of the part and do that all the way around, so just a little bit of trimming and keep on adjusting until you get a nice flush fit of the part. Okay, that's nice and flush. We'll do a little bit of filling around that and smoothing out a bit more, but that shouldn't need an awful lot more work to get it looking good. So with those panels done, we can get the nose gear bay, the cockpit and the fuselage halves joined up. You can see it's a pretty snug fit of the undercarriage bay to the bottom of the cockpit, but it does go. I'm just going to check that, make sure everything's going to go together before applying any cement to that bottom plate. That's going to be okay. Okay, I think we're good to go. Let's get some Contact a Professional on. I just managed to sneak this front bulkhead in before the cement had set, and I've included that not because I want to add the detail. I'm going to close the nose up, but it does add some extra stiffness to the front of the fuselage, so it's good to get that in. This separate moulding is done like that so that Italeri have been able to mould these separate panels on top. But the downside of that is that it's not a great fit. So that's going to need a little bit of work. But I'll fit that once I've cleaned up the top of the cockpit combing. So I think that's quite a milestone. The bulk of the work I think on this kit is the cockpit, which is mainly done, and it's good to get that wheel bay done and installed into the model, and we've used the first of the 3D Chute Expert undercarriage parts, which look really nice. So I'm going to let that dry for a couple of days. In the meantime, I'm going to do a little bit more work on the Border Models Lancaster. For those of you that have been waiting for that build, I'll be doing the navigator station in the next couple of days. So for those of you that are building this kit, I know a few of you are, I hope that's been of use. And as I said, once this is dry, I'll get on with the rest of the airframe, and that'll be coming up in part 3. So thanks for joining me for this one, everybody. Look after yourselves. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.